So, I mentioned a little earlier about how perfect doesn't come out of the box, right? And because of that, we often get pressures to implement niche systems, right? To close gaps between things, which is a very appropriate thing to do. But it presents some unique challenges also to do that. So what's your stand on integrated solution set versus best of breed? Who knew this was going to circle back around like it did, right? Because now we're in the throes of everybody wanting a niche system thinking that's going to be perfect too. Patty?
Yeah, that's funny. Actually, I was talking to a friend of mine who said, best of breed is back. They both have challenges, and I don't really have a strong sort of conviction on either one of those philosophies because I can see the pros and the cons for both. But as the organization Gwinnett that I'm in, you might call us a integrated solution. At least, we have a primary vendor, but as Dee said, we have a lot of other products too. And I think that's one of the challenges with the integrated solution set. They don't do everything well. And depending on the leadership of your organization and how easily they can be swayed, you may start pulling out things like the ER system because it's not state-of-the-art, and bringing in a niche product, that presents a lot of integration challenges. And, there may be other products that you pull out because they're weaker in the integrated package. And so you think you have an integrated solution. I think the most dangerous thing is staffing and planning for an integrated system and then ending up best of breed. Because you didn't plan for it, you're not prepared for it. And you're not staffed for it. And then looking at the best of breed, you end up usually with pretty happy end users because they all have the product they want. But then you have an integration nightmare and a high cost support for that. And interoperability, let's face it, we're not quite there yet. And so I know we're headed in that direction, and I've certainly seen improvements over the last 5 years, but we're not really there yet. And so there are a lot of challenges and expectations that aren't necessarily met when you start integrating or interfacing systems together. So, but I have to say, Gwinnett right now is supposedly an integrated solution, and we have those challenges today. So I don't know that there's really getting away from that. So then you have to think, well, do we just go best of breed? So it really, it's one of those that it kind of goes with the culture of the organization and how much they are willing, or the leadership has the opinion that you should go with an integrated solution set. So but there's some compromises for that, and that you have to be willing to accept, or you end up like us. We're really kind of best of breed.
So in my mind, it's a real dichotomy, truly a contradiction, because this movement toward accountable care organizations is all about team care, coordinated care, integrated data for metrics, but yet the EMR platforms aren't fully evolved to really be able to deal with some of the very specific specialty needs. Oncology is one of the ones that I'm dealing with right now. So the thing is, they're happy in a silo, but if you look at that continuum of care, and ensuring that anything that happens anywhere with that patient is available to everybody, that, I think, that flies in the face of what we're trying to do. And to your point, interoperability really isn't there yet, right? So, you get the vendors, and we love you guys, absolutely, but you get the vendors who tell your business users that, oh, we have an interface with Cerner. Oh, we've done this with Cerner, Cerner being my system at Emory. But when you've seen one interface, you've seen one interface. right? Regardless, because the nuances of the organization, the environment of the organization all have to play into what kind of integration strategy you really can have and can do. And to your point, staffing is another complication in that as well. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox now, but Mark, what would you like to say?
Oh, you know, I agree with what Patty said. There's a philosophy around it. My personal feeling is rarely have I seen interfaced work as well as integrated. So that's kind of a general principle that I follow and have followed for a while now, and I think a lot of it really depends on the system that you're implementing and chosen to implement. I think there's another aspect of this too, is that health systems today just cannot afford to continue to be best of breed. We just simply can't afford it. Never has the pressure to reduce IT costs been as much as it is today because of what's going on in our industry. And you all are part of it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So we at Piedmont, we try to follow a rule that basically says if our integrated solution does the majority of the function of a best-of-breed system and clinical quality and patient safety is not compromised, we will go with the integrated solution every time to help keep our costs down. And that's part of how we manage it.
Yep. Sheldon?
I've often thought of hospitals as this little miniature city, kind of independent of itself. But even within that, rural hospitals as well as bigger hospitals still have their own little, as Jaco used to say, information kingdoms, and the little distinguished departments that think they're so unique that they can't conform to the rest of the world within the four walls of that hospital. So TJ Sampson also has several of those, many of those. I found out we have like 80 different independent little departmental systems, even though we have a primary vendor. So there's always a reason for it, be it right, wrong, or indifferent, and whatever the history of that organization allows that to happen, you have to deal with those systems, independent systems, in whatever way you can. As we just heard, I think there is a huge difference between simply interfacing and integration. And it takes a lot of work to get to that plateau that we call integration. And again, it's still on a very difficult learning phase as we deal with those independent systems that we must continue to allow in our systems. And so the challenge really is to minimize the cost, minimize the effort, and minimize the quality and data integrity as that information flows between multiple systems, because as the first and second question dealt with, our goal really is to get integrated information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great points. So all of you touched on, decreasing budgets, right? And budgets are more brutal than they've ever been before. And we're all fighting tooth and nail just to keep what we have, and it'd be nice to get a little more, but we certainly don't want to be decreased. So let's talk about how do we deal with that, that situation now. Do you find that IT benchmarking helps with the C-suite when we're in budget mode and we're trying to justify our value once again, right? Because we are a high dollar cost item. The only time we're a revenue producer is when meaningful use money is coming in, right? So how do you guys deal with that? Have you got any advice, or do you find benchmarking helpful? It's not helpful. Does the C-suite get it? Mark?
So at Piedmont, we participated this past year in 3 benchmarking activities, one through HIMSS Analytics, one through the Scottsdale Institute, and one through Epic. Epic actually has their own benchmarking. As a matter of fact, the results of it just came out last week. So we're going through the data right now. It's pretty comprehensive, so we get to compare ourselves to the net spend of other Epic organizations. There are basically benchmarks that are fairly standard in our industry, and one of them is if you are a fully integrated EMR, whether you're interfaced through multiple best-of-breed systems or through a primary vendor, you are supposed to be right around a 4% spend of net patient revenue for your IT spend. That's a fairly good industry benchmark. So that is what the C-suite generally looks at, and so when you compare yourself to that, you can use those different surveys, whether it's HIMSS Analytics or some of the others that I mentioned, to actually go against that. With our Community Connect efforts that we're doing, we actually became a revenue generator for the first time. So the first thing I did was take it right off our percent of net spend and send the report over to the C-suite so they could see that we were actually decreasing our costs. And so
awesome.
that was just a little humor for you all. little financial IT humor, I guess. But,
that's great.
But no, we are under constant pressure to keep that down for all the things that we've talked
right.
about.
And you mentioned Scottsdale Institute.
Yes.
So at Emory, so we have to sort of play in UHC and Action OI data, but that really is useless from an IT perspective. But we use Scottsdale Institute has been a wonderful organization for benchmarking, and HIMSS Analytic is the other one that's really key for us as well, and Cerner for us. So that's very similar. What about you, Patty? What are you using? And
actually, very much the same. Action OI and HIMSS Analytics, and
yep.
then I have used McKesson data in the past. And you know, it's interesting. My experience with benchmarking is I'm not sure how well it works in helping to justify the budget, but you have to have it.
yeah,
And
I agree.
so, I use often the just overall percentage rule of thumb. To me, that seems to work better. They seem to understand percentages of overall expense, or
yes.
you know, and how it relates to the specific organization. One of the challenges with HIMSS Analytics Action OI is not every organization has the same sets of technologies that have the same sets of support requirements. And really, the primary software vendor actually has a lot to do with how you should be staffed and what your costs are going to be. And so there is a balance, I think, between that vendor-specific benchmark and then the industry. And, you know, I've been doing this long enough that I can educate the executives on, well, if you're this vendor, you're going to be around this percentage. If you're this vendor, you're going to be around this percentage. But it's still hard for them to get their arms around, and that doesn't come out of those benchmarking models unless you have vendor specific. And so it's tricky, although, you know, it's funny, I've never had a board or a leadership team say to me, well, if that's where HIMSS Analytics says we should be, then let's raise the budgets to get there. They've never said that before. However, they seem to appreciate if you're a little under where the benchmarks say you should be. But that's usually the point you're trying to make. Yes. We are under, we don't have enough. So it's interesting. They think it's a job well done if our costs are below where our benchmarks are. And that's why I say I'm not sure how helpful they are, but you got to have them.
Yep.
So because the dollar amount by itself looks very large. And then when you align it with some of the benchmarks, it helps put it in perspective.
It was one other thing I was going to mention on that too. One of the challenges we have implementing new EMRs is we have a lot of capital spend. Well, of course, that capital spend flows right to our depreciation, which raises our percent of net spend. So when you're doing a large EMR implementation, the cost pressures can be even heightened because of the fact that you have a large bolus amount of depreciation as you're flowing through your books. It's something you have to be cognizant of.
That's a good point. Sheldon, what do you think?
So as a preface to my answer to the question, I'm assuming every vendor represented in this room is profitable, ranging from 5, 10, 15, 30% a year. In the rural healthcare market, healthcare providers, we're facing many times losing money, break even, rarely making money. So the challenge really is to how to operate and provide the technology, as was mentioned actually all morning long so far, and how to support that in an environment where you really don't make a lot of money, if any at all. So I really agree with Patty. In all of my years in this industry, I've not had a lot of faith in IT benchmarks. The one common one is the percent of net operating expenses of IT. My biggest problem with that is it really does not reflect quality. And I don't really know of any benchmarking for spending of IT dollars or measuring IT success in a hospital as a form of quality that's across the industry. I think that's really very, very hard to do if you could do it at all. So the default for me and Patty and many others is what's our percentage of spend of NOE, and the range is from now probably 2 to 5 or 6%. For years I've heard banking has always been at 10%. I've never had the opportunity for a board member to say, I'm in the banking industry and we spend 10% of IT and spend in our industry, so why don't we give you 10% of our net operating for capital or operating?
Who has a question for our panelist? Don't make me pick on you. Chip, don't you have a question for the panelist? I knew you did.
Hi, Chip.
Chip asked where people were on a more broader perspective from HIE, HIE Stanfront, Georgia Hen. I can't say the E word because Cerner will kill me, but how are you guys from a bigger perspective on HIE?
I've been at Gwinnett about 2 months. Denise already found me, and which I'm glad, because we are at a place where we'd really like to get moving with the connection to the Georgia Health Information Network, and we're evaluating the legal documents now. So we're ready to move forward. Yeah.
We're doing the same thing, looking at the GA-HIE documentation. We do participate in Epic Care Everywhere. As a matter of fact, Wellstar is also going live, in the process of going live. They had their first pilot about a month and a half ago, and one of their first patients that came into the Wellstar office, the physician pulled the Piedmont record up out of Care Everywhere. So that was kind of a nice thing to see.
Gentlemen?
So in Kentucky, there's this thing called KHIE, Kentucky Health Information Exchange. I don't really know a lot about it in terms of intimately how it operates, but I do know that TJ Sampson submits data to it. My suspect is that there's not much utilization of that by TJ Sampson, and probably many others. Again, I think we're on the far left-hand side of the learning curve on how to utilize an HIE. I think that's going to speed up some. There is a meeting next week that I'm probably will be attending, and if this meeting were after that, I could probably give you a little more information. But I think generally speaking, as opposed to many local hospital or regional efforts that have been going on in Georgia and many other states, the exception in Kentucky would be Louisville, Lexington, but outside those two big cities, everybody else is kind of relying on the statewide network of KHIE.
And from an Emory perspective, similar to what you guys are talking about, we've had our private HIE for a little while now that we feed. Our specialty practices, physician practice have been acquired, and also our clinically integrated network is using that. And we have signed with Georgia Hen, and actually was the first health system to do that. Go Emory! And so we're in the process actually of beginning that work to get connected and to deploy. So we're excited about that. So the question is, what are your thoughts on developing a health population management strategy? We all have to have one. Does that count?
Yes, that's the answer. Ours is being developed along with our clinically integrated network, and it will include a hopefully very short system selection process.
Yeah, and Emory, we're the same. Our clinically integrated network is all based on population health management. Mark?
We currently are partnered with a business partner who's providing that pop health services for us right now.
So I got a little bit longer answer. In 1994, I was at a VHA meeting in Indianapolis, and I spent the whole day learning how to deal with and recognize and identify and quantify and benchmark clinical outcomes for the purposes of doing patient population management. I went back and told my boss, who was the CFO at that time in Kentucky, not Glasgow, And his response was, that's what they're doing on the West Coast. It'll never happen on the East Coast. I think it has happened. It's happened all across the country. Again, we are dealing with not only cost within our structure to do employee health management, but I think we're on the real cusp of working with other healthcare entities in our region as well as locally to help understand how we become a fee-for-service organization for a health event to an organization that helps provide the long-term care of keeping you well and being paid for that. And that is a major, major, major paradigm shift. And I think, again, we're on the far left-hand side of that, but there is talks of that and that's really very encouraging from my perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question from the audience? Okay, stages and where you are with ICD-10.
Let me go first.
Yeah, sure.
At Gwinnett, actually, we're very far along. We have a great effort to have us prepared to start dual coding in April. So we're in good shape.
Okay.
We've been in the process of doing that as well, really focusing on the training and education portion and even potentially looking at other technologies and tools to help us with that effort.
So our initiative on ICD-10 has been quietly building up steam, but it's going to gain momentum after about October 14th. And the reason that date is because that's the deadline to submit for stage 1 meaningful use, of which we are going to attest to for the previous 3 months. So once we get that past us, we will then do a major effort on ICD-10 and meaningful use too. There has been a lot of preparation in our system implementations of Soaring Clinical and Soaring Financial to help get us to the point of being able to meet ICD-10, but clearly there is a lot of work over the next 12, 15 months to be able to meet ICD-10 requirements.
Absolutely. So why don't we round out our panel discussion with the last question. Is there a story that you could share with us? Because I always like to end on a patient care note, right? Because that's really why we're all in this business, right? To take care of our patients and our patients' families, of which we all will be a patient one day if we haven't already been, right? Is there a story that you can share that demonstrates in your organization or you personally how health information technology made a difference?
I don't have a story, but I have something to say.
Oh, okay, I have a story. Actually, a couple of years ago, I was involved in implementing a different vendor system at a hospital up in Illinois for a year. I was there for 12 months. It culminated at the beginning of the 12th month by turning on that system, clinical, financials, et cetera, and the go live was very successful, very intense over a week to 2 week period of time. During that 2 week period of time, I got the pleasure of kind of roaming around the halls and nursing stations, et cetera. I didn't witness this, but I did get told a story which was really very interesting. The system included pharmacy, medical administration. So one night during a night shift, we got a call to our command center that the medical administration system just wasn't working because it gave them an error. Well, after investigation by the IT folks and the pharmacy folks, what really happened is the system worked and it kept the patient from being administered an incorrect pharmacy dose. I don't know that it was life-threatening, but I think it's a great example of what an EMR does.
You guys want to share one?
You know, one of the things that we talked about when we decided to select an integrated platform to move our health system on was, and it's already happened, but we have a hospital we have 3 hospitals south of Atlanta, one that's at Piedmont Noonan, about 35 miles south of here. We have another hospital about 50 miles north of here up in Jasper. And we have had patients present that have had their history on the Epic system that had been treated at Noonan, actually presented at our Mountainside facility. And you think about the power of that, to have that one single integrated record across our health system. It's very powerful. And I have several personal stories, one that affected my own family.
Your daughter?
Actually, my son. That happened several years ago, but I can share that another time.
Okay. Okay. Patty?
At Gwinnett, we actually have, as part of our patient safety program, we have a daily safety check-in, and it's probably about 40 clinical leaders and maybe 10 or so administrative leaders come together, whether in person or by telephone, every day and spend about 20 minutes doing a 24-hour look back, 24-hour look ahead, and review all safety issues. And so I don't have a particular story, but what I will say is what I often hear, because most of what you hear is near-miss type incidents or safety concerns going forward, is where technology has saved something, whether the order went to pharmacy and pharmacy caught it, or whether the physician was entering orders and caught something. And so, you know, that's actually one of the things that makes me very proud to work at Gwinnett, because and this is 7 days a week, every day, the clinical leadership of that organization are looking at the safety of the patients that are within the walls of that health system. And I will also say that in that meeting came an event where we don't have technology and we had a significant issue. And probably the positive thing about that is the clinicians now understand how technology could have prevented that, and that technology will be high on their list.
Oh,
So,
that's an awesome story. But you know, people believe that IT leadership is about technology, but it really isn't. It's a behavioral science. Understanding the behaviors of your organization, your staff, your leaders, your customers, and then facilitating that transformation. That's IT leadership, and you guys are prime examples of that every day and everything that you do. It's my pleasure to have moderated the panel. Thank you so much for your time and your effort. Let's give them a big round, guys. Thank you.